The factory floor had never been this silent. Hundreds of robotic arms stood frozen in midair. Warning alarms echoed through the massive building. On the giant digital screen above the production line, one number kept climbing. $237,000. $238,000. $239,000. That was how much NovaCore Robotics was losing. Every single minute. Engineers ran from one control panel to another. Outside consultants shouted over each other. No one could restart the machine that built nearly half the company's products. Standing in the middle of the chaos was the company's new CEO, Natalie Ashford, only 23 days into her new job, and already facing the biggest disaster in NovaCore's history. She watched another team of engineers fail. Then her eyes landed on a grease-covered maintenance technician quietly walking toward the disabled machine with nothing more than an old metal toolbox. Natalie frowned. Who authorized him? Nobody answered. The man knelt beside the machine, carefully listening to the faint clicking sound inside the steel housing. Before he could even open his toolbox, Natalie stopped him. We didn't hire the best engineers in America to watch a maintenance worker play engineer. The entire factory went silent. She pointed toward the exit. Turn in your badge. You're fired. The man didn't argue. He simply closed his toolbox, walked over to his 10-year-old son, Owen, who had been waiting after school with his backpack. The little boy looked up at his father. Dad, who's going to fix the machine now? Grant gave a quiet smile. They hired people they believe are better. Father and son turned toward the exit. 5 minutes later, 42 engineers, 3 robotics specialists, and a world-famous consulting team. All failed. The machine remained dead. Then an elderly technician slowly removed his safety glasses. His hands were trembling. He looked at Natalie, then at the man almost out the factory door. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Ma'am, you just fired the only person who knows every bolt, every wire, and every line of code inside that machine. Natalie frowned. What are you talking about? The old technician swallowed hard, then spoke the words that brought the entire factory to a complete stop. Because Grant Sullivan didn't just repair this machine. He invented it. The applause rolled across the city square like distant thunder. Hundreds of people stood beneath white tents decorated with blue ribbons bearing the logo of Aldridge Foods International, one of America's largest food manufacturers. Television cameras lined the front row. Local politicians smiled beside oversized donation checks. Volunteers in matching shirts carried trays of hot meals toward families waiting behind metal barriers. It looked like generosity. It looked like hope. It looked exactly the way a billion-dollar charity event was supposed to look. But not everyone standing there had come for the cameras. Near the back of the crowd, where the reporters never pointed their lenses, 11-year-old Mason Carter tightened his grip around his younger sister Emma's hand. She was only 6, her cheeks pale beneath messy blonde hair tied into uneven pigtails. Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the steaming food. Not because she wanted dessert, because she hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Mason leaned down. Just wait a little longer. She nodded without complaining. Children who had known hunger long enough rarely complained anymore. Across the square, a black SUV stopped beside the stage. The crowd immediately shifted. Executives straightened their jackets. Security officers adjusted their earpieces. The woman stepping from the vehicle was Eleanor Pierce, 38 years old, CEO of Aldridge Foods International. Magazine covers called her America's Iron Executive. Financial television called her the youngest woman ever to double a Fortune 500 food company in less than 6 years. Her employees called her brilliant. Her competitors called her dangerous. Very few people called her kind. She wore a charcoal business suit despite the warm spring morning, her silver watch catching the sunlight as she walked toward the stage with practiced confidence. Every movement looked rehearsed. Every smile lasted exactly long enough for photographers. To the world, she appeared perfectly composed. Inside, she was exhausted. 3 cities in 2 days. 4 board meetings. 1 investor conference. Now another charity event organized by her public relations department. Her assistant whispered while handing over today's schedule. 8-minute speech. Ribbon cutting. Photos with families. Interviews. Then airport. Eleanor nodded. Nothing unexpected. Nothing personal. Exactly how she preferred it. She believed emotions complicated decisions. Facts built companies. Feelings built headlines. Her late father had repeated those words throughout her childhood until they became something close to religion. As Eleanor climbed the stage steps, applause erupted again. Below the platform, Mason quietly watched. He wasn't looking at the CEO. He was looking past the stage, toward a man sitting alone beneath an old maple tree almost 50 yards away. The man wore faded blue jeans, worn work boots, and a gray flannel shirt whose sleeves had been rolled above strong, weathered forearms. Beside him sat a little girl drawing flowers inside an old notebook with pencils worn almost to nothing. Her father smiled every time she showed him another picture, even though his own stomach had been empty since yesterday morning. His name was Rowan Mercer. 40 years old. Single father. Former civil engineer. Current handyman. Most people who passed him saw only another struggling father trying to survive. None of them knew that years earlier Rowan had designed emergency bridge systems used across 3 states. None of them knew why that career ended. Rowan preferred it that way. His daughter Lily, 8 years old, looked up from her drawing. "Dad. You really aren't hungry?" Rowan smiled gently. "I ate while you were asleep." It was a lie. A practiced one. Parents become experts at lying about hunger. Lily accepted the answer because she wanted to believe it. Then she tore a page from her notebook. On it she'd drawn their tiny apartment. The two of them holding hands. A bright yellow sun. One enormous tree. And beneath the picture she'd carefully written. Rowan swallowed hard before smiling again. "It's beautiful." She beamed. "You can hang it at work." He didn't tell her there hadn't been much work lately. The construction company he'd been repairing equipment for had closed 2 weeks earlier. Since then, every morning began with the same routine. Wake before sunrise. Search for day labor. Fix whatever people needed repaired. Return home hoping tomorrow looked better. Sometimes it did. Usually it didn't. Still, Lily had never gone to bed believing her father had given up. That mattered more than anything. Back near the food tents, volunteers began serving meals. The line stretched farther every minute. Families slowly moved forward. Except Rowan. He remained beneath the tree. Lily looked toward the line. "Dad. We're not getting food?" "We will." "When?" "When everyone else has enough." She frowned. "But we're hungry." He gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "So are they." Lily looked at the long line again. Then quietly nodded. She understood far more than any 8-year-old should. Across the square, Mason noticed everything. He watched Rowan refuse to join the crowd. Watched Lily pretending she wasn't staring at the food. Watched Rowan quietly tighten his belt another notch beneath his shirt. Mason recognized that movement immediately. His own father used to do exactly the same thing before he disappeared years earlier. It fooled children. Not children who had lived through hunger themselves. Mason slowly turned toward Eleanor's stage. The CEO had just begun speaking. Today isn't simply about feeding families. It is about strengthening communities. The audience applauded. Mason barely heard another word. He tugged lightly on the sleeve of the elegant woman standing closest to the podium. She looked down in surprise. Security immediately noticed. One guard started forward. Eleanor raised a single finger without looking. The guard stopped. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Mason hesitated. Then leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Ma'am, they haven't eaten." Eleanor glanced briefly toward the food tents. "The volunteers are serving everyone." He shook his head. "No. The man under the tree. He keeps telling his daughter he already ate. He didn't. He hasn't eaten since yesterday." For one brief second, time seemed strangely slow. Eleanor followed the direction of Mason's trembling finger. She saw Rowan sitting beneath the maple tree. saw the little girl happily coloring, saw the father smiling despite obvious exhaustion. Something about the image refused to leave her mind. Not because he looked poor. She'd seen poverty before. It was something else. His posture. The quiet dignity. The way he kept all attention focused on his daughter instead of himself. She had seen someone sit exactly like that once before. Years ago, when she was 16. Her father had been meeting with a young structural engineer inside company headquarters. She remembered passing the conference room. Remembered seeing that same calm posture. That same steady expression. Before security escorted the man from the building. She never learned his name. The memory disappeared almost as quickly as it came. Her assistant interrupted. "Ma'am, the governor is waiting. The cameras are live." Eleanor looked toward the stage. Then back toward Rowan. For reasons she couldn't explain, her prepared speech suddenly felt completely meaningless. And before anyone could stop her, she stepped away from the podium, straight off the red carpet, walking directly toward the quiet single father beneath the maple tree. 500 people turned to watch. The governor stopped clapping. Executives exchanged confused looks. Television cameras instantly swung away from the stage. No one understood what the CEO was doing. Least of all Rowan Mercer. He looked up only when polished black shoes stopped in front of him. Lily smiled politely. "Hello." Eleanor barely noticed the little girl. Her eyes remained fixed on Rowan. She studied his face. Older now. More tired. A faint scar near his left eyebrow. But unmistakably, the same man she'd seen walking out of her father's headquarters 8 years ago. A name surfaced from somewhere deep in her memory. Before she could stop herself, she quietly asked, "Mr. Rowan Mercer, where have you been all these years?" The heavy factory doors slowly closed behind Grant and Owen. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun reflected across the parking lot as father and son walked toward Grant's old silver pickup truck. Owen finally broke the silence. "Dad, are you mad?" Grant smiled faintly as he unlocked the truck. "No. You don't get angry when someone doesn't know the whole story." Owen climbed into the passenger seat. "But she fired you." Grant started the engine. "She fired a maintenance technician. She doesn't know anything about me." The truck quietly pulled away from NovaCore Robotics. Neither of them looked back. Inside the factory, the atmosphere had become even more tense. Another hour had passed. The Atlas core remained completely lifeless. The outside consultants had replaced sensors, swapped processors, updated software, even disconnected the central control system. Nothing. Every attempt ended with the same flashing message. System authorization denied. The lead consultant rubbed his forehead. "This makes no sense. We've checked everything." Natalie Ashford folded her arms. "Then check again. We're already losing nearly $12 million. Declan Pierce quickly stepped in. "My team will solve it." Natalie looked directly at him. "I hope so. Because investors arrive tomorrow morning." Across the factory floor, Harold Benson quietly walked toward the machine. He had watched Atlas Core every day for nearly 20 years. He knew every sound, every vibration, every startup sequence. And something about today's failure felt familiar. He slowly crouched near the lower maintenance panel. His eyes searched the floor. Then suddenly, he froze. The small bolt Grant had picked up earlier was missing. Harold's heartbeat quickened. Only one person in the entire company knew why that bolt mattered. Grant. Harold immediately hurried toward the executive platform. "Ms. Ashford." Natalie turned. "Yes. I think we made a mistake." Declan interrupted immediately. "Harold, this isn't the time." The old technician ignored him. "I've worked here 31 years. I've seen that machine opened exactly 3 times. Natalie looked interested. "And?" Harold took a deep breath. Grant wasn't trying to repair it. He was diagnosing it. Declan laughed quietly. "A maintenance worker?" Harold didn't even look at him. "He knows that machine better than anyone." Declan's smile disappeared. "Enough." Harold stood his ground. No. Not this time. Natalie studied Harold carefully. You seem very confident. I am. Why? Harold looked toward Atlas Core. Because. I watched him build it. The room became silent. Declan immediately shook his head. Impossible. Our records show Atlas Core was designed by Titan Engineering Solutions. Harold looked directly at Natalie. Those records are incomplete. The original project had a different lead architect. Natalie frowned. Who? Harold answered without hesitation. Grant Sullivan. Declan's face changed for only a split second. Almost too quickly to notice. But Natalie noticed. Meanwhile, Grant and Owen had reached home. Their house sat at the end of a quiet street. Nothing luxurious. Just a small white wooden home with a wide front porch. Flowers surrounded the entrance. A small weather station hung beside the mailbox. Inside, everything was simple. Organized. The walls weren't covered with expensive paintings. Instead, they displayed framed sketches of machines, mechanical drawings, old patents, awards from engineering competitions. Most visitors assumed they were decorations. Only Grant knew they were pieces of his past. Owen placed his backpack on the kitchen table. Dad, can I work on my robot? Grant smiled. Homework first. Owen sighed dramatically. I knew you were going to say that. Grant laughed. That's because I'm your father. As Owen disappeared upstairs, Grant quietly opened the garage. It looked nothing like an ordinary garage. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Prototype motors. Mechanical arms. Circuit boards. Old engineering notebooks. 3 industrial-grade 3D printers. A robotic arm half covered beneath a cloth. Everything carefully organized. Grant walked toward a locked steel cabinet. From inside, he removed a worn leather notebook. Across the cover. Only 2 words. Atlas Project. He slowly opened it. Inside were handwritten sketches. Algorithms. Mechanical calculations. Notes written over 15 years. His life's work. He gently smiled. Then closed it again. Some chapters were meant to stay closed. Back at NovaCore, another consultant slammed his laptop shut. We're finished. Natalie stared at him. What? We can't fix it. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You told this board you were the best robotics consultants in America. We are. Then why is my machine still dead? The consultant hesitated, finally answering quietly. Because we didn't build it. Those words echoed through the factory. Harold slowly stepped forward. No, you didn't. But I know someone who did. Declan immediately interrupted. We're wasting valuable time. Natalie looked sharply toward him. Are we? Declan forced a smile. A former maintenance worker isn't going to solve what world-class engineers couldn't. Before Natalie could respond, another voice came from behind. Dr. Simon Bradford had just arrived. One of the most respected robotics scientists in the country. He had been flown in by private jet only an hour earlier. He walked directly toward Atlas Core, studied it for nearly 5 minutes without speaking, then quietly asked, Who designed this system? Declan answered confidently, Titan Engineering. Dr. Bradford slowly looked up. No, they assembled it. They didn't design it. Natalie frowned. How can you tell? The older scientist smiled slightly. Every engineer leaves a signature. Not with a pen. With the way they solve problems. He pointed toward the machine's internal framework. The architecture. The redundancy. The emergency logic. I've seen this style once before. Natalie stepped closer. Where? Dr. Bradford looked around the factory, almost expecting someone, then quietly said, 15 years ago, there was a young robotics architect everyone believed would change American manufacturing forever. Natalie's heart skipped. What was his name? Dr. Bradford answered without hesitation. Grant Sullivan. The entire room became silent. Declan looked away. Natalie noticed. She slowly turned toward him. You knew. He didn't answer. You knew who he really was. Still, Silence. Before anyone could speak again, a loud metallic crack echoed through the factory. Atlas Core suddenly released a cloud of white steam. Emergency alarms switched from red to flashing black. Every employee instinctively stepped backward. Dr. Bradford's expression changed instantly. He looked directly at Natalie. If we don't shut the system down correctly, the entire production core could destroy itself within the hour. Natalie's face turned pale. Can your team stop it? The scientist didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the factory entrance, where Grant had walked out less than 2 hours earlier. Then he quietly said the words Natalie never imagined she would hear. Don't call another engineer. Call the man you just fired. For the first time since becoming SEAL, Natalie Ashford had no answer. The entire factory stood motionless as black warning lights flashed above the Atlas core. The emergency display changed again. Critical core failure. Structural damage imminent. Every engineer stared helplessly at the giant machine. No one touched it. No one even moved. Dr. Simon Bradford quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. We don't have much time. Natalie looked at him. How long? If the cooling sequence isn't restored, the main synchronization shaft will lock. And after that? He looked directly into her eyes. The Atlas core will destroy itself. The number above the production floor continued climbing. $18 million. $18,180,000. $18,360,000. Every passing minute meant another fortune disappearing. Natalie immediately turned toward Declan Pierce. You knew. Declan remained calm. I don't know what you're implying. She stepped closer. You knew Grant wasn't an ordinary maintenance technician. Declan smiled politely. He repaired equipment. That's all. Harold Benson couldn't stay silent anymore. Liar. Every head turned. Harold walked into the center of the factory. I was here 15 years ago. I watched Grant spend 3 years building Atlas. I watched him sleep in this factory. I watched him miss birthdays because he refused to leave until every line of code worked. The room became silent. Harold looked directly at Natalie. He wasn't repairing the machine. He was protecting it. Natalie slowly turned back toward Declan. Then why? Was he working in maintenance? Declan answered immediately. He accepted the position. Harold shook his head. No. He had no choice. Dr. Bradford frowned. What happened? Harold took a deep breath. After Atlas was completed, Grant refused to approve a cheaper replacement component. He said the new material would eventually destroy the synchronization system. Natalie listened carefully. Harold continued. The board wanted lower production costs. Grant refused. The next morning, his entire engineering division disappeared. Natalie's heartbeat slowed. What do you mean? Disappeared? Closed. His project files vanished. His design team was reassigned. His office was emptied. And 6 months later, Grant returned, wearing maintenance coveralls. Silence. Natalie slowly looked toward Declan. You did this. Declan laughed softly. Business decisions were made. No. Harold interrupted. You buried the man who built your success. Cross town, Grant sat on his back porch. The evening sun reflected across the quiet neighborhood. Owen sat beside him, assembling a small robot from recycled electronic parts. Dad. Did you really get fired? Grant smiled. I guess I did. Owen kept working. You don't seem upset. Grant looked toward the sky. When I was your age, my grandfather told me something. What? If people only respect you because of your job, they never really respected you. Owen thought quietly. I think they made a mistake. Grant smiled. So do I. Before either of them could say another word, a black SUV stopped in front of the house. Then another. Then another. Neighbors quietly looked through their windows. Owen whispered, Dad, I think that's your boss. Grant already knew. Natalie stepped out of the first SUV. She wasn't wearing her business jacket anymore. Just a white blouse with rolled sleeves. For the first time all day, she looked less like a CEO, and more like someone carrying the weight of a terrible mistake. She slowly walked toward the porch. Grant stood. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Natalie broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Grant answered calmly. "You don't owe me anything. I fired you. You fired someone you didn't know." She looked down. "I should have known." Grant didn't respond. She took another step. "The Atlas core is dying." Silence. "My engineers can't save it." Still, Grant remained quiet. Natalie finally asked the question she never imagined herself asking. "Will you help us?" Grant looked toward Owen. Then back at Natalie. "You have the best engineers in America." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I was wrong." Grant noticed something. She wasn't protecting her pride anymore. She was protecting 3,000 employees. "If Atlas fails," Natalie said quietly, 3,000 families lose their jobs. That sentence changed everything. Grant looked toward Owen. "What do you think?" The boy smiled. "You always help people." Grant laughed softly. "I was afraid you'd say that." An hour later, NovaCore Robotics came alive again. Not the machines. The people. Every employee gathered along the main production floor. Word had spread. Grant was coming back. Workers whispered among themselves. "He's really the inventor? I thought he fixed conveyor belts. I've worked here 10 years. I've never even seen him inside engineering." The factory doors opened. Grant walked inside carrying the same old metal toolbox. No expensive equipment. No laptop. No assistants. Just the same scratch toolbox he'd carried for years. Employees instinctively moved aside, creating a path toward Atlas Core. Natalie walked beside him. "I'll clear everyone out." Grant shook his head. "No. They stay." She looked surprised. "Why?" "They helped build this company too." Grant stopped in front of Atlas Core. He didn't immediately begin working. Instead, he gently placed one hand against the steel frame, exactly the same way he had done earlier that morning. He closed his eyes. Listening. The entire factory watched in complete silence. 30 seconds passed. He smiled. Very slightly. Dr. Bradford noticed. "You know exactly what's wrong." Grant nodded once. "I know why it's pretending to be broken." Every engineer frowned. "Pretending." Grant slowly crouched beside the lower access panel. Without looking, he reached underneath the machine, pulled out the exact same bolt he had quietly placed into his pocket hours earlier. The room looked confused. Grant held it up. "This isn't part of the failure. It's the clue." Natalie frowned. "What do you mean?" Grant looked toward Declan, who had suddenly become unusually nervous. "This bolt doesn't belong to Atlas." The factory became silent. Grant continued calmly. "Someone replaced the original synchronization lock. Not by accident. On purpose." Every eye slowly turned toward Declan Pierce. For the first time all day, the vice president of engineering looked genuinely afraid. Grant quietly stood, holding the small steel bolt in his hand, then looked directly at Natalie, and asked one question that changed the entire investigation. "Would you like me to fix your machine first, or show you who tried to destroy it?" The question echoed through the factory. "Would you like me to fix your machine first, or show you who tried to destroy it?" No one spoke. 3,000 employees stood frozen. Natalie looked from the small steel bolt in Grant's hand to Declan Pierce. For the first time since she had become CEO, she saw fear in her vice president's eyes. Not concern. Not frustration. Fear. Declan forced a laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're accusing me over a bolt?" Grant remained calm. "I'm accusing you of nothing. I'm simply following the evidence." He walked toward the maintenance workbench and placed the bolt under a bright inspection lamp. Dr. Simon Bradford leaned closer. Grant pointed to tiny markings around the threads. "See these scratches?" Simon nodded. "They weren't made by normal installation." Grant continued. Someone forced this bolt into place with an oversized impact wrench. Harold Benson stepped beside him. Atlas was never assembled that way. Grant nodded. Exactly. Natalie frowned. What does that mean? Grant looked directly at her. It means someone opened the synchronization housing after the machine entered production. The only people authorized to do that were the Vice President of Engineering and the Chief Systems Director. Everyone slowly looked toward Declan. His confident smile had disappeared. Natalie crossed her arms. Declan, I asked you a question. Did you authorize maintenance inside Atlas? Declan answered immediately. Routine inspections. Grant quietly shook his head. No. There were no scheduled inspections. Natalie looked surprised. How do you know? Grant smiled slightly. Because I wrote the inspection software. It records every authorized opening. He walked toward the central control computer. Although he had been gone for years, his fingers moved confidently across the keyboard. Within seconds, a hidden maintenance screen appeared. Dr. Bradford stared in disbelief. I've never seen this menu, Grant replied, because it was designed for emergencies. He entered a long authorization code from memory. The system unlocked. Then a maintenance history appeared. Only one unauthorized access. 8 days ago. Authorized by Declan Pierce. The factory erupted into whispers. Declan's face turned pale. Natalie slowly turned toward him. You told me nobody had opened Atlas. Declan swallowed. It wasn't significant. Grant calmly continued scrolling through the records. Then another file appeared. A deleted maintenance report. Grant restored it with 2 keystrokes. The report filled the screen. Synchronization lock replaced. Original part removed. Replacement installed. Proved by Declan Pierce. Natalie's voice became ice cold. Why? Declan finally lost his composure. You wouldn't understand. I was trying to save this company. Grant looked at him quietly. No. You were trying to profit from it. The room fell silent. Grant reached into the system again. Another file opened. Purchase orders. Invoices. Consulting contracts. Millions of dollars had been paid to one supplier. The replacement synchronization locks had failed every 18 months. Each replacement generated another enormous contract. Dr. Bradford slowly understood. My God. He created repeat failures. Grant nodded. So the company would keep buying replacement systems. Harold closed his eyes. I knew something wasn't right. Declan slammed his fist onto the table. Everyone does it. Companies upgrade equipment. Grant answered calmly. Upgrades improve performance. You designed failure. Natalie stepped toward Declan. You've stolen from NovaCore for years. Declan shook his head. I built this company. No. Grant quietly interrupted. You built invoices. I built Atlas. Security officers entered the factory. Declan looked around desperately. You can't prove criminal intent. Grant smiled. I already have. He pressed one final key. The large factory screens switched from production data to security footage. 8 days earlier, Declan entered Atlas after midnight. He removed the original synchronization lock, installed the cheaper replacement, then deleted the maintenance report. Except he hadn't deleted the hidden engineering archive Grant had designed years ago. Every action, every access, every modification had been permanently recorded. The entire factory watched in complete silence. Declan slowly lowered his head. The security officers stepped forward. One removed his company badge. The other placed him in handcuffs. As he was escorted through the production floor, no one said a word. Not one employee defended him. After the doors closed behind Declan, Natalie looked at Grant. I'm sorry. He smiled politely. I believe you. But apologies don't restart factories. She nodded. Then tell me what you need. Grant picked up his old toolbox. 5 minutes. Everyone else. Step back. 3,000 employees watched from behind the safety line. Grant knelt beside Atlas Core. He removed the damaged synchronization lock, carefully cleaned the housing, then reached into his toolbox. Inside a small velvet pouch was a brand new original synchronization lock. Dr. Bradford stared. "You've been carrying that?" Grant smiled. "For 15 years. Natalie looked confused. "Why?" Grant gently turned the steel component in his hand. "My father taught me something. If you build something important, always keep one final spare. You never know when someone will need it." Grant carefully installed the original part, tightened each bolt by hand, never rushing, never forcing anything. When he finished, he stood, walked to the control console, placed his hand over the old green start button, the same button he had pressed the very first day Atlas came to life. He looked around the factory, at thousands of anxious faces, then smiled. "Welcome back, old friend." He pressed the button. Nothing happened. 1 second, 2, 3, a quiet mechanical click echoed through the building. Hydraulic pumps slowly awakened. Cooling fans began spinning. Green lights replaced red ones. One robotic arm moved. Then another. Then another. The massive conveyor belts slowly rolled forward. Atlas Core came back to life. The entire factory exploded into applause. Employees cheered. Some laughed. Others wiped away tears. Harold Benson simply leaned against a railing, smiling. Dr. Bradford shook Grant's hand. "In 40 years, I've never seen engineering like that." Grant answered softly. "Good engineering shouldn't be noticed. It should simply work." A week later, NovaCore Robotics held its largest company meeting in history. Every employee gathered inside the main assembly hall. Natalie stood at the podium. She looked across thousands of workers, then invited Grant onto the stage. He hesitated. He never enjoyed attention. The audience refused to stop clapping. Finally, he walked forward. Natalie smiled. "A week ago, I judged someone by his uniform. I assumed titles measured ability. I was wrong." She turned toward Grant. "Today, I'm offering you the position that should have always been yours." She handed him a new employee badge. It didn't read Maintenance Technician. It read Chief Innovation Officer. The audience erupted again. Grant looked at the badge, then quietly handed it back. The applause stopped. Natalie looked confused. "You don't want it?" Grant smiled. "I'll help rebuild NovaCore. I'll mentor every young engineer willing to learn. But I don't need a title. I've already spent enough years proving who I am." He looked toward the crowd. The best engineers aren't the loudest people in the room. They're the ones who keep solving problems, even when nobody knows their names. Silence filled the hall. Then every employee stood. Not because a CEO asked them to, because respect had been earned. That evening, Grant and Owen walked out of the factory together, just as they had done hundreds of times before. Owen looked up at his father. "So, you're famous now?" Grant laughed. "For about a week." "And after that?" Grant looked toward the sunset. "Tomorrow, I'll come back to work. Machines still break." Owen grinned. "And you'll fix them?" Grant placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No." He smiled warmly. "I'll teach someone else how." As they walked toward the old pickup truck, the giant NovaCore logo behind them glowed in the evening light, not as a symbol of one man's success, but as a reminder that true greatness isn't measured by titles, expensive suits, or corner offices. It's measured by integrity, humility, and the quiet confidence to do the right thing, even when no one is watching.